Well, here we are. We're in our final conversation in our finance class, and I thought it was very fitting to end this course with a discussion of family. When we look at what we're doing with personal finance, is it really personal? I really think it's about others. When you look at essentially what are we doing and why are we doing it, 80% of it is really about family or loved ones or those that are around us, protecting those individuals or helping make their journey a little bit easier through life. Part of it is obviously for your own journey as you're personally responsible, for your own actions, your own retirement, your own career planning. But when you look at it, it's really the majority is around those that are around you. So, or involving those that are around you. So, with this lecture, it's really a conversation around some elements that to get you thinking about family, about how finances interact with our definition of family. And again, those definitions may be different, and I expect them to be different for each one of you. But hopefully, there are some themes that are common to all of us when we look at those loved ones in our life. All right, well, let's take a look at some of the random thoughts that I've put together for this last lecture, and we'll remove my picture altogether here. But I really kind of classified it as rings, diapers, and diplomas as some of the essential. And then as I was going through this, I said, well, let's just finish out the entire life cycle. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the kind of depressing, but somewhat the entire life cycle of a person. So I may not have captured everything here, but I think some of the essentials. So the first one that we'll talk about as for many of us as we get older in life and we enter adulthood, we think about getting married or partnering with someone. And that is usually a time filled with emotions and filled with excitement and filled with possibility for those of us that have been in that route before and for those of us that may be just entering relationships, but often when you're in a period of heightened emotion, uh, sometimes logic goes out the window. So, what I would ask you to do is something to think about as you're looking at that partnering. And by no means am I offering partner or marriage advice here, but uh, there is, I would say, nothing wrong with slowing down the process a little bit and getting to know that person. And I'll speak just from the financial standpoint, is getting to know that person financially. Finding the right financially the right person for you. So what does that mean? If your partner is, spending money crazy and they have, you meet someone and they say, well, yeah, I've declared bankruptcy a couple of times. Hey, that might not necessarily have been a bad thing. Maybe they were in some business ventures. I don't know. But it would definitely mean a conversation over a period of time. If you see that maybe that individual is a shopaholic and living way beyond their means, and you may just love them to death. But when you get married legally, those lives come together. So you do need to be careful there. And for many of us who have been around a while and we've seen, marriages fail of our friends and colleagues around us, so much of that is driven by financial misalignment. One spouse and another not agreeing financially, and that causing stress in the marriage. So look for someone who's that financially right person. And hopefully, you are through this course have become a financially right person. You know some basics of financing and living within your means and making budgets and retirement planning. You're going to want to find someone who's like-minded. Okay, if or I would suggest that you find someone like-minded. You may be able to live with someone who's a little bit more uh, as far as spending, maybe they're a spend a shopaholic, but do keep in mind that is probably the number one reason for divorce is that financial misalignment. So have some of those conversations right up front, and that you're going to see that theme all the way through here this lecture. Conversations. They may be uncomfortable. They may be, well, they're uncomfortable, quite frankly, having those conversations, but there will be a good time to have them. And if that person is the right person for you, having that conversation is a good thing. So, what would that conversation maybe look like? It may be, hey, what's your credit score? I know that sounds terrible, but you probably don't want to do that on the third or fourth date. But as you are approaching, your lives interacting together, knowing what those credit scores are, maybe having a fun, you know how to pull your credit now for free, right? Through the approved government website. So maybe have fun and say, hey, let's take a look at our credit scores if your partner doesn't know. And so you can say, wow, I've only got a 505 credit score. Yeah, that's like, you just left bankruptcy kind of credit score. And I have a 729. So do you, what happened, Um, Again, a very difficult and uncomfortable conversation, but to have that conversation after 3 years of marriage, a lot more difficult, a lot more uncomfortable, and a lot more expensive if things have to be unwound. Okay, my next bullet point is staying with the financially the right person. So, what does that mean? So, that means, once you are married, staying married. Divorce is very, very expensive. So you want to, once you find that person, make sure you yourself are making the right moves that, to maintain that marriage, that you are staying true to that kind of that financial discipline, if at all possible. So again, and I'll just touch on divorce here very quickly, and so many of us have been through it. I have not been through divorce. After 20 years of marriage, luckily, not. Hey, so it's always time, I guess. But at this point, we're so far into it. Why not just continue on? But the um, we all usually know people who have been divorced, and it is a very expensive and process typically, even for people who mutually, without any conflict want to separate, it can be an expensive process. And then for those who are involved in the process, where there is conflict, it gets more expensive. Retirement accounts get pulled apart, um, separated. Even Social Security incomes can be aligned to different parties, so it can be very, very expensive. So, best thing in life is once you find that right person, make sure that you're making all the moves to stay with that person, and especially if they're financially the right person. Now, what if you marry someone and everything's great, you're financially aligned, things look super, and then after 15 years they change? They start buying cars and other things, and behavior isn't what it was. Again, hopefully that can be solved with communication. There might be an underlying reason that's going on with some financial principles that may not align with yours. Uh, but that's the best way to try to deal with that is just through uh, that kind of constant communication. And then let's say things do go awry someday and you are getting divorced. I would always, when you look at a married life, I think to me, it makes sense that if well, you find here's typically what you'll find is maybe one spouse has taken on more responsibility for the rearing of children, and the other spouse was more maybe on a career oriented path outside of the home. And that could be the husband, the wife, whatever the labels that you wish to use within the relationship. But that could put one person at a disadvantage during any kind of separation. So it's always, you know, I guess, good to keep investing in yourself and remembering that, maintaining somewhat of having somewhat of that independence in there, not, always thinking, well, I got to be doing XYZ because I may get divorced. But I guess maintaining that alignment with not completely letting yourself be removed from the financial decisions of the of the union, of the partnership, of the marriage. So be involved in those financial decisions, all the way through, whether you are the external worker or the internal worker. And I'll say they're both very, very important if you're lucky enough to do that. Many couples have to work outside of the home and maintain those external careers outside of the home, which is also very difficult. But long story short, in all of this, make sure you're having those brutal conversations about finances. Have them frequently and often, and have them before you get married, and definitely continue to have them after you get married. If you do find something that doesn't align before you get married, then at least you go into it knowing, that you knew certain things about the individual, and you kind of go into it with eyes wide open. Or maybe you decide that this person is great for me in 50% of my area, but in the other areas, long term, when we look at buying a home, maintaining our careers, and maybe having others in our life, and that whether that's children or whatnot, that they may not be the best for you. So, all right, there's enough about getting married and that part. Just again, some thoughts going around that, and you define what that means for you. But hopefully, part of that is communication. All right, next one, having a baby. So, with many of partnerships in marriage, there usually is, um, for most folks, there's a baby. There's that thought of reproducing, having a baby. That could be through adoption. That could be through natural childbirth. Through those mechanisms. And again, whatever your definition of marriage is. But when you have that other little person in your life, there are some things to definitely think about. Now, there's a couple ways little people come into our lives. There is the happy surprise, and then there is the plan. The plan. So hopefully, if you can, you can go with a plan, and that gives you just a little bit more able to get your affairs in order before the baby comes. Now, again, for some of us, it's the happy surprise. Things happen. Life is what it is. And, you could still have some planning in there, but you may be on a much more compressed time frames. So know that when you have a baby, that there are definitely trade-offs. Uh, if you're a responsible human being, there are trade-offs. And those trade-offs are, that all of a sudden, you're not the center of your own life, or even your partner, your wife, your husband may not be the complete center of your life anymore. That little baby becomes the focus of everything in your life. They are helpless, weak, can't do anything for themselves, and you are the sole provider. And it's quite frankly can be one of the most important human endeavors is raising a good human being. So no stress there, but there is a lot of trade-offs in it. Now, that also means having very upfront front and frank conversations with your spouse. Maybe you don't want to have children, and that's okay. Maybe you do want to have kids. Maybe the other partner doesn't want to have kids. That has destroyed marriages as well. I've seen that happen in my circle of friends and acquaintances, where one person was like, "Well, what do you mean you don't want to have kids?" Well, we never talked about it before we got married. Oh, now it's a problem. So have those conversations up front about children, and at least you kind of know going into it where each one is coming from. And I want to say, whatever your opinion is, whether you want to have kids or not have kids, it's absolutely okay. But just know that, because there is so much of a shift that happens when children happen. When your priorities will change. For those of you that are parents out there, again, travel and your own personal development are going to be taking a back seat from time to time for that child. So keep that in mind. You're going to look at some of the expenses involved, and they are a lot, a lot. Daycare. So, for example, I'll give you my situation. We had two kids in daycare. My children are 4 years apart. So at one point, they were both in daycare. Our daycare expenses alone were $1,400 a month. That was for about a period of a year and a half until, thank God, one of them went to school. And then when they went to school, it was like, wait a minute, you mean like kindergarten is free? It was like the best thing in the world. So it was more than our mortgage payment. Okay, so we had two kids in daycare, can be very, very expensive. You and many couples do. We had it. We had the discussion. Should someone stay home at this point? When you're looking at that much money going out, should someone stay home? We decided not to. Actually, the conversation was leaning more towards me at the time because my wife was making more money, um, and potentially for me to stay home. But we decided not to do that. Again, we had found a. I mean, you really have to partner with that daycare, and we found a wonderful daycare. So, but there are other methods too when you look at that. So there's not only daycare, which is very expensive. Again, one spouse may elect to stay home, which again is great, but also has some, so there should be some thoughts and conversations about what that means, for that other person. Their career is going to be, placed in a little bit on hold for a few years, maybe quite a few years. And what are the impacts overall to the family on that? And then there are some other possibilities. I've got friends and colleagues who are lucky enough to have uh, their their parents, the grandparents, who have been able to help with childcare, and that's great because it's someone with a family, and they usually don't charge you anything, so it's can be a wonderful thing. So, but definitely something to think about. Even other expenses. I just remembering from just a few years ago. Right now, my kids are 7 and 11, so the other major expenses, diapers. Diapers were phenomenally expensive. You're buying those every couple of weeks, and you're going to Costco and buying huge quantities. And formula. You know, if your baby's on formula, just those formula, it was ungodly expensive. There's a reason when you go into Walgreens and they have it locked up behind a little plexiglass area. It's one of the most highly thefted items shopping for shoplifters to grab is formula because they can sell it very easily and it's very expensive. So just those expenses. And man, when my kid was out of diapers, that was another like amazing moment. Like, yes, all of a sudden we have an extra few $100s a month that we're no longer spending on diapers, and the same thing with formula. So keep that in mind. Also, I'll throw this in here too. When you're having a baby, if you're luckily, if you could be in the planning mode, or in the early, you're planning the baby, make sure that you have all of your life insurance in order. Not to be depressing, but should something happen to mom, should mom acquire something happens to her that could potentially, maybe a disability or even worse, you want to make sure that having your life insurance in place. Again, modern science is great. Modern birth, very, typically low risk. But again, you are going through something. And as we talked about life insurance before, where, when you're relatively, young and healthy, it's cheap. It's dirt cheap. As you get older, it gets more expensive. If you have any health hiccups, it gets much more expensive. Or you become uninsurable because of health hiccups. If you're diagnosed with some sort of, situation that insurance companies just simply do not want to touch. So think about having your life insurance in order. And I'll also say both health insurance and maybe even the disability insurance as well, having that all in order. Remember too, okay, so life insurance, what is the purpose of life insurance? Is it so that your spouse can live the rich life and have it on easy street? No. The reason for life insurance is so that your spouse, that income is replaced. Unfortunately, that's the brutal reason for life insurance. If you make $50,000 a year and you and your spouse, you're married, and you're planning your life out and you're planning it on, generally, yeah, that $50,000 a year is always going to be coming in. Um, we're going to buy home and cars and et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden that's gone. Puts that surviving spouse in a tremendous hardship. Okay, so again, having that life insurance, and when you throw kids on top of it, even worse, even worse. So, a dual income, no kid family, and one spouse passes away. Yes, probably a little bit easier to unwind. That spouse could sell a home, reduce their lifestyle. That they've, that mutual lifestyle that was once through two incomes. But when you add kids on it, totally different thing. That spouse is expecting, you're going into this basically for the next 20 years, is when you're thinking about this to raise a child or beyond, and that income is now gone. So life insurance up. That was the key for me with each one of the children. That's when I personally started to rack up additional life insurance for that event. Now you have kids. Kids aren't cheap. You've heard that all the time. You've heard the numbers on in the media, $250,000, $300,000, to raise a kid. They kind of come up with these numbers based off of what it would cost to hire some of these services to raise a child. So it's not necessarily that expensive, but it is pretty gosh darn expensive to raise a kid. So when you think about just a they fall and break their arm at the on the playground, okay, and even if you have good health insurance, you're going to be looking at some sort of copay or deductible. Might be looking at $1,000 right there, maybe $10,000 total, but you had good health insurance, so you're only out 500 to 1,000. That can be a hit. That's a hit that you normally didn't have because you didn't have kids. Now you do. There's another human being complicating things in your life. Now they're wonderful, fantastic complications, having kids in your life, but it's more. So again, think about all of those things. One of the things to think about is education. So as we all know, education is very expensive, but it is becoming so essential as a element of, and I'll say training as well. Education and training is really necessary for success in a modern life. If you look at anybody, I say most individuals um, have that base of education and or training in their life. Now, how are you going to help your children through that? Now, that's a brutal conversation too that you would have with your spouse. Uh, do you help save for, let's say, college? Or do you put them in private school, K through 12? Now, where I live here in Toledo, Ohio, there is kind of a culture, believe it or not, on private school. I've in all the other places I've lived, I have not seen this kind of culture about private education. But I'd say about half of the people I know or maybe a third send their kids to primarily, and just not because I work for a Catholic institution, but the Catholic schools around here are very popular. Where in other parts of the state or country that I've lived in, the public schools were definitely the most popular method, with only a very very small percentage going to private. So but these parents that are doing this are spending a lot of money, especially at the high school level. It is for some of these kind of upper division, I would say, Catholic high schools is very expensive to the tune of maybe 10,000 or more a year. So that's basically, you're looking at at community college type of expenses in that realm. So definitely expensive. Now, do you what are your thoughts on that? Those are conversations you want to have with your spouse because that could come to some disagreement. I'll bring in my own personal story. We were sending our kids to a private school, to a Catholic school. Our local school system was just fine, but my wife had gone through a Catholic school education up until the point of high school, and she thought that that would be a good route for our kids. Okay, I said fine. Let's go ahead. Now, it was the elementary was cheaper, and you can apply for scholarships and etc. But that was still a few thousand a year to send them to a school. And ultimately, though, when we looked at what we were getting at the private school and what we could get at the public school, which was a very good public school, we did have a conversation about over about a year and a half uh, to bring them out. I was more in favor of bringing them out of that school because I really didn't see um, there was actually just for the private side, believe it or not, even though it was private, they didn't have as many resources as the public schools had. So both of our children now are in public school. But these are conversations you want to have. Rather than if you're in marriage and all of a sudden your spouse says, "Yeah, they're going to private school all the way through high school." Okay, do you know that's $15,000 a year to go to Notre Dame Academy for girls? Um, where is that money coming from? So those are, really that's one of the top girl schools here in this area is Notre Dame Academy for girls, and maybe you do that. Maybe that's a sacrifice. That's the sacrifice you want to pay. I will say that particular school has a fantastic reputation. Almost everybody goes on to college. But then when does it stop? You also pay for their college as well. So again, conversations that you're going to have with your spouse. How are we going to fund their education? Maybe you say we don't. That's okay too. And that's the way it's always been done for many, many years. You go to public school. The parents, you do the free things. What are the free things? You work with your children while they're in public school, making sure they do their homework, helping tutoring them, making sure they excel, and in that way you can get a great education in most public schools. I'll say most. In a vast majority of public schools, you can get a great education, and then they can go on to college. I hear people say, "Oh, I can't go to college; it's too expensive." Well, I do know a little bit about financial aid, not a much, but a little bit, and quite frankly, you can do it. I read something online. Um, Actually, it was from Khan Academy, which some of you may know. And Khan himself he was talking, and we had this in our module that his sister was looking to go to Brown, a very, very, very expensive, exclusive university, top, like Harvard, Yale, that kind of level, and was able to do that through scholarships and student loans. And even if the scholarships weren't available, the student loans were there. So it is doable for almost anybody. It's just there is a price to be paid because those are typically loans that have to be paid back through your working years. Now, there are many mechanisms for payback that for federal financial aid that are income adjusted, so you can pay them back as your income, increases, and that it's not a tremendous burden to your existing income. So just as an FYI, I would recommend as you're starting your careers and you're paying back those federal financial loans that you look at for the income adjusted payments. Those are very, very nice. All right, so we've got, the education. Then have those conversations and have them with your children too when it becomes time. So they know, yes, we are going to be funding some of your education, or no, we're not. It's going to be up to you. And here's what we need to do. You got to make sure you get good grades, try to get scholarships, make sure that you're focused on a nice paying job when you get out of it, because you're going to have student loans at the end. So there you go, education. Now, kind of shifting focus here. Career. What are your career plans as you go through this life cycle? Remember that most careers are just, they're not going to stagnate. You're going to have continuing education. You may need to go back and get your master's degree. You may have to go back and get a terminal PhD at some point. If you're especially in education or some other research oriented career. So keep that in mind that you're going to have some things you're going to need to take care of. Maybe you're going to need additional training. Maybe you're going to need retraining in a new career. And you have to plan for unemployment as well. Natural, it just happens. Make sure that you're not forgetting about these essential elements. They will definitely impact the family. Even though these are focused on your career, these are elements that you'll need to take care of, or at least think of, um, again, for the overall picture. Health. I put this in here as well. This is very critical. Focusing on the personal health of your family. The you know, do you have health insurance? That will destroy a marriage very quickly. If or a family will destroy a family very quickly. Has the potential, I should say, to destroy a family very quickly. If you have a major health situation and you don't have health insurance and you're starting to see the bills come in at $25,000 a pop, um, not only do you have the stress of potentially a some sort of illness, which is important, you need to take care of that. You need to get, someone needs to get healthy and better. But now you've got financial pressures on top of that. So again, having health insurance is fundamental. That will reduce some of that stress. You're still going to have some. There's still going to be copays. There's still going to be, maybe some co-insurance in there, but it should be much more reasonable and something that will not totally sink your family. So make sure you're looking at that. Also, make sure that you're looking at any kind of proactive measures you can take. Keeping your family out of the hospital. What are some things that you can do there through, kind of those boring, diet, exercise, good mental health practices. Don't forget the mental health practices. Those can be just as impactful, if not more, on a family as well. So trying to keep those things in mind, to have some preventative measures to hopefully not have to use the greater measures of health insurance or mental health care or any of those issues there. Okay, another issue to think about. For many of us in this class, I think the average age is about 28. So this is not hitting everybody, but it will hit some of you in time. And that is having older parents and what that might mean to your family. There will come a time when having those really good, I guess, adult conversations with your parents about what their plan is. You know, asking mom, dad, or whoever is that person in your life. Um, do you have life insurance? Where do you keep the life insurance policy? Where do you keep your financial papers? Do you have a durable power of attorney? Do you have, a do not resuscitate order? Do you have any other powers of attorney regarding your wishes and health care? So these are conversations. Do you have money for final expenses? Okay, so someone dies and you realize they had $200 in their checking account and that's it. You know, uh, at least knowing is a little bit better. At least you could maybe plan for it if you know that that's going to be something that will come your way. What are your parents' thoughts on nursing home? Are they adamant about staying in their own home until the bitter end? Is that a realistic situation? Um, these are conversations to have. They'll be difficult. You're gonna know things. You're gonna say, Mom, Dad, you can't live in this house anymore. They're not gonna be ready not to live in this house anymore. There may be some headbutting there, but having those conversations is better than not. At some point, you may come to a mutual understanding of where that might be. So, where they're coming from, where you're coming from, how things are going to be handled, because again, most likely it will fall upon someone in the family. And I bring in the family as well. I've seen this also in my banking years, tear apart families where Um, so let's say you have four brothers and sisters. There's always that one brother or sister who thinks and maybe is doing it all, and the other ones aren't. Have those conversations with your siblings about your parents. I would suggest that you come to an agreement on how you're going to approach your parents about these conversations, whether it is as a group or individually. That's totally up to whatever works to your own family dynamic. So many people are scattered all over the country. Your siblings may be all over, and you may be the only one living near mom and dad. Obviously, it's going to fall more on you because you're the one that's in town. But again, have these conversations and bring in any other family members who may be, I would suggest, involved in those conversations. It just makes things easier. Just the basic conversation. Where are the financial papers? Because let me tell you, when you're trying to find those financial papers in their home and you don't know where they're at, and they could be in a closet, they could be hidden, they're usually hidden somewhere, because they perceive that they're worth a tremendous value. Sometimes they're not really they have no worth unto themselves, but they'll hide them, and then you're trying to find them, when they're in the hospital or they've passed away. So just knowing where that those financial papers are, maybe helping them get organized. They may appreciate that, depending on where they're at, and again, there might be some give and take here. It's very kind of difficult. Imagine yourself, the roles are kind of being reversed, and that's difficult for a parent, I'm sure, to have their children now taking care of them when they have seen themselves in their entire life as the caretaker. But maybe they'll appreciate helping you organize. Maybe you put everything in a nice fireproof little file box that they can keep in one central area, so you know where to go and get that information. Things like living wills and durable power of attorneys, these are all very important things. And I mentioned, having even conversations around do not resuscitate orders. If someone says, look, if something happens to me, I don't want to be brought back, that's a toughie. But again, that's a conversation I think that should be had at some point. Retirement, of course, we've talked so much about retirement and your own retirement planning. Uh, don't forget about that conversation. That's a narrative throughout your entire life. Even when you're young, you're thinking about retirement planning. And of course, when you're in retirement, then it becomes a huge focus. But have those conversations. Have those conversations up front with that potential partner and spouse. Maybe they're saying, "Look, I'm an artist and I'm gonna work until the day I die. I love my work." Okay, that's great. I work a very demanding nursing job, and my body will probably give out around the age of 63. I do not want to work until I die. So, having those conversations, kind of upfront with your spouse on what your anticipations for retirement are, how you're going to approach meeting those anticipations, and what that dream life looks like for the both of you. Last thing you want to find out, at age 55, 60, that you both have two dramatically different interpretations of what retirement is going to be. Now, life being what it is, we do grow and change. So what we thought we wanted for retirement at age 27 may be dramatically different than what we want retirement to be at age 57. But having those constant conversations of what retirement looks like, how we're planning for it, are we saving the money, even our asset allocation, again, all of these nitty gritty details and the big conceptual stuff, have those frequently and often with those that are around you, and maybe even involving your children as well. Because at that point, or when they become adult children, having them involved in those fundamental conversation of what your retirement life is going to look like. All of a sudden, mom and dad moved to Florida, and you were thinking mom and dad were going to be in Ohio with you because you have a family and you have little kids, and grandma and grandpa say, "Oh, see ya, we're retired, we're moving to Florida." And you're like, "Wait, mom, dad, where are you going?" "Oh, we've always wanted to move to Florida." "Oh, well, we didn't know that." That could be a big thing. You want grandparents to be maybe near your children, and the grandparents decide that they want to go to North Carolina and spend their golden years, and you can visit them as often as you want, but you know, again, that can cause some misconceptions. So having even those conversations of what retirement looks like all the way around for everybody involved in the family. And then lastly, oh, I couldn't think of a real soft way to think of this, so I just put it right out there: death. Thinking about we're all mortal creatures, and we have this life cycle from birth to marriage to having children to planning for that children, our careers, our health, taking care of our parents, our retirement, and then ultimately our own death. Hopefully, we all live long and wonderful lives and see all these things unfold throughout our life, our children's growth, our grandchildren, etc. But there are some things to think about. Um, with that one final journey that we all are going to go on, is how have we planned for that? Do we have the life insurance in place if it should happen untimely? When it's not supposed to happen. If it happens when we're in our prime, in our income earning years, do we have life insurance? Do we, have we covered final expenses should something happen, or are we going to burden others with the cost of burial and funerals? Um, do we have estate planning? Hopefully, we've lived this wonderful life and we've accumulated funds, through our retirement. Um, chances, if you're lucky, or maybe not lucky, but if you're well planned, uh, when you die, there will be some money left. There will be a house potentially or real estate that may be fully paid off. There may be substantial money still left in a retirement account because no one, if we all knew the year we would die, we could spend our money down to zero, and that would be perfect, right? But we don't. So there's usually actually a rather large sum left in these retirement accounts. What are those final, that estate planning? Where is that going to go? Having a will, I should have put that on there. Having a will is essential. Let me just say, again, this is all about family. And again, many, many years in banking, frontline dealing uh, with businesses, but primarily I dealt with people. Uh, and this was very common, would be complete family feuds, absolute knockdown, drag out feuds over the money left over because there was not a clear will. Have a clear will. Update it often because that will, especially, I'll say most likely it was with the children, on what mom wants to go where, you know, have that all listed out. Have hopefully find, if necessary, wise legal counsel, trusted legal counsel that help you can design a will, and maybe someone who is going to be the executor of that will. The executor is someone that takes care of your estate, the executor of your estate. They're going to be there's a person called an executor that you assign that takes care of these final things for you. Takes care of the checking account and the retirement accounts and the car and the stuff in the home and helps that get to where it needs to go. And that's usually obviously a trusted individual. Now, you need to answer the question on who that, is that a family member? Would that be one of your children? It all depends on the dynamic of the family. I've seen it where, the one of the children was selected as the executor. Of course, the other two brothers and sisters didn't like that person, and that just, was crazy. So you may want to think, do I have my attorney be the executor? They're going to charge a fee to the estate, but maybe it's worth it. Have a third party as executor, um, that has no connection, emotional ties into this thing. And yes, there is a fee, but having, conversations about executors, maybe there's no problem, and you meet with the kids and they say, oh, Chris would be a great executor. Let him be the executor. He likes dealing with that stuff, and we're all one big happy family, and we know that he is going to do a great job and getting everything separated. Or maybe the family dynamic, and that's just not the way you want to go. But I have seen that rip apart a family, and it doesn't heal. It didn't heal. Those perceived injuries, whether real or imagined, by the surviving family members, caused lifelong gaps that, to my knowledge, in many situations those gaps were never closed. So having your final wishes expressed through a nice, solid will, a good executor in there can make everything so much better. So that all goes to estate planning. Some of you might be fortunate enough to have enough money to be gifting. That's something too that you'll want to talk to a trusted financial advisor, an attorney that's familiar with that, because there are some rules about gifting. I would deal with clients who it was they had they had so much money that they wanted to gift every year to their family members to pay down, to reduce the size of their estate. And it was kind of great because they could gift it, and you got to be careful too. Maybe um, there are individuals out there, if they just got $10,000, would not be responsible for it. Might do themselves harm. So you have to think about that. If you were to die and a certain family member was to get $50,000, is that a good thing? Or do you have that money put into a trust, or maybe even larger amounts put into a trust that can be only used for certain things? No, that those exist. I've dealt with those as well. So let me just kind of explain that, because this all can be a lifesaver. Let's say you're older now, okay? You remember nothing from this class except this one thing. Okay, this is 50 years from now. And you have a million point five or whatever it's going to be inflation adjusted. And one of your kids maybe has some problems. They're an adult now, but they've struggled with, I'll pick on one that just comes up from time to time: substance abuse. Maybe they have a substance abuse issue. They're doing great now, but if you were to die and they all of a sudden they got $400,000 in money, that may be a little bit too much of a temptation for them. Or maybe they were just never good in planning money, and they just, even though you did your best and told them to read the index card book and you try to train them, but you can only do so many things as a parent. But let's say for whatever reason they just not good with money and actually spend it somewhat, could be spending it hazardously on themselves. You can have money put into a trust managed by a trustee, and that trust can say pretty much whatever you want. So basically, you can control the money from the grave. Isn't that weird? You can control the money from the grave. You can say, again, it's usually higher net worth individuals, but not always, not always. So you could have that this money is only used for education, health, career training, or whatever, rent or something like that. Can't be used for anything else. Can't be used for vacations. Can't be used for buying, any illegal activities, nothing like that. And the trustee would do their due diligence to ensure that that payment was made only for those reasons. So that's very common. All major banks have trust departments, and they'll manage these trusts pretty much for the life of the trust. Now, there's a fee involved. They're not doing this for free. So trustees, there is a small fee involved, and also depends on the complexity of the trust. Um, so keep some of those things in mind. Even gifting to organizations and colleges, and Mercy College, occasionally receives money from people who have thought of us kindly in their wills. Um, and also you often hear about churches and other organizations receiving money. So just think about the whole picture. What that would look like for you. Because eventually we all reach that final phase, and making that transition for the loved ones in your life easier, I think, is a good thing. And that is usually through very kind of in-depth conversations with those individuals, having things in writing, and having good legal structures in place upon your death. So that just makes it all kind of cut and dry, and there's no interpretation for individuals. All right, so that kind of concludes a kind of a general discussion that we've had on what I'll call the life cycle of the family, from marriage to babies to education to career, health, older parents. Um, Hopefully, this is just, you're going to come up with your own ideas and definitions of what each one of these will mean. Um, but hopefully, this got you to thinking about some of these things. And we're all at a different point in these life cycles. I'm a little bit further down on on this chain. I'm more on the right hand side over here. I have actually dealt with I've actually dealt with all of these at this point with the death and estate planning. My grandmother, she had an estate that I was the executor of. We're in retirement planning now. I've had older parents who I've had to help. Health issues. And of course, big a fan of health insurance. So yes, all of these you're going to hit on maybe all of these things throughout your lifetime. So, all right. Well, hopefully this has got you to thinking, and thanks for watching.